Hello, it's Sunday, everybody. So this is the final episode of MC and MADD Talk the Civil War. This is episode 30. We're going to be doing a overview and covering a few topics that we happened to miss. How did we miss Andersonville, MC?
Well, because you really can't discuss Hendersonville to the end of the war anyway. So, I mean, the prisoner of war situation for the North and the South, where people think that the biggest killer in the Civil War were the bullets. The biggest killer in the war was disease. And this was true regardless of whether or not it was a prisoner of war camp or whether or not it was just in the regular armies. Disease killed more men than battlefield weapons did.
That goes for most wars.
It went for most wars up to World War I.
Here's the thing, though. When we want to talk about Andersonville, first thing that starts getting flung around, war crimes. All right. You're looking at a Confederate ran prisoner of war camp. The Confederates could hardly feed themselves by the end of the war. How were they going to feed these troops that the North were refusing to exchange anymore?
Well, there's a reason why they were refusing to exchange, because in the North, when they were exchanging them, the Southerners who were well-fed while they were in the North went right back to the battlefield. In the North, that in comparison to what was going on in the South, when the Union troops were repatriated, they went home.
Yeah, we're gonna get to the Union camp in New York, but I do want to talk about Andersonville a little bit first. And go ahead, MC. You probably know a little bit more about it than I do. Okay, yeah, the Northerners were malnourished when they got released. But then again, the whole
malnourished. They looked like Dachau victims. There were people there that were dying that weighed less than 90 pounds when they would go in at about 160.
And the same thing was happening in New York. I'm trying not to just throw stuff back and forth here. So go ahead.
People died because of disease and crowded conditions. We're not talking disease here.
How exactly can you defend crowded conditions when the Northern War Machine was going full throttle? They have 12,000 beds in that New York camp.
I said crowded
conditions. 30,000 prisoners.
Crowded conditions are crowded conditions. In fact, when you were living in frickin' camps, generally those conditions were crowded. It was no different than what they would normally be living in camps. Yes, there was a sanitary issue that became part of a problem and became part of illness. But there's a difference between what happens in crowded conditions with illness, all right, and dying of starvation.
Who was the Confederate commander in charge of Andersonville? I'm not sure off the top of my head. I could try and open up that site that I provided, but I'm not sure if it mentions it there or not.
Oh, I don't remember. Let me look real quick here.
Because there was a very big push after the war to have him arrested and
he was
crimes. Yeah, he was.
Henry Wirtz. Captain Henry Wirtz. All right. And he was charged with murder in violation of the laws of war, tried and found guilty by a military tribunal, hanged in Washington, D.C. in November 10th, 1865. A monument to Wirtz has been erected by the Daughters of the Confederacy and stands today in the town of Andersonville.
Why would the Daughters of the Confederacy erect a monument to somebody who...
Because they like dead Yankees.
And they like directions. Oh, just real quick, MC too. It's Dachau. Dachau is Disneyland.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay. Let's take a look here. All right. Andersonville National Historic Site began as a stockade built about 18 months before the end of the U.S. Civil War to hold Union Army prisoners captured. Located deep behind Confederate lines, the 26.5-acre Camp Sumter, named for the South Georgia county it occupied, was designed for a maximum of 10,000 prisoners. At its most crowded, it held more than 32,000 men, many of them wounded and starving in horrific conditions with rampant disease, contaminated water, and only minimum shelter from the blazing sun. 12,920 died and were buried in a cemetery created just outside the prison walls. It was holding 32,000 men. It was built for a maximum of 10,000. Did you expect at the end of the war the Confederates to build more prison camps? They couldn't even.
The prisoners were begging to allow the commanders to let them go out and build themselves actual barracks, and he refused.
He refused because he was worried they were going to escape. How far behind enemy lines were they?
If they escaped, they're without weapons, they're without arms. All right, most of them are starving to death, and even if they made it all the way back, he already knew they wouldn't be going back to the lines. They wouldn't be going back to fight.
So just allow them to disperse.
No, I mean you do the best you can, and then you let them build freaking regular camps. You let them build regular freaking buildings that house them. There was no reason why he couldn't have done that. Well, they might have used something to escape from. How many were actually going to escape? Versus what was happening.
There's crying behind me. If someone else could talk for a minute, please. 40, you haven't said anything yet.
Well, I don't think there's any incentive for anyone to escape, to be quite honest. I mean, if everyone is malnourished and that, if they're just literally just begging for better conditions, why not do it? It's a lot better than expending the manpower to do it yourself when you could just essentially have slave labor building their own camp. So, I mean, honestly, fuck it. I wouldn't have a problem.
That's exactly what they should have been doing.
Well,
the conditions would have been.
If that's what you're willing to do, then why not ship them to Richmond and freaking have them dig the trenches for us while you're at it? I mean, what are you trying to do? Bring in another labor force?
Well, that way you still have to feed them and all that kind of stuff. But what about the resources deficit that the South had? They're building buildings and all this kind of stuff. They still need the materials and shit to come from somewhere.
Yeah, but Georgia is very heavily wooded. The areas around those areas have a lot of wood. There's plenty of raw material for them to build housing for them. It didn't have to be anything really significant, just something to get them out of the weather. I mean, something even if you were just let them go out there and cut the trees down and create plank roads. Right, or corduroy roads to allow themselves so they're not standing in shit.
Fair enough. I
mean, for crying out loud, they could have. There's a number of things he could have done to do this. Now, I will admit that a lot of this stuff is hindsight from 2020, and we're looking at the situation from the 20th century. All right, but Andersonville was so notorious. All right, both in the South and the North, that soldiers would literally commit suicide on the battlefield rather than with like a leg wound having to be captured, all right, and sent to Andersonville.
Wow.
All right, well, let's dig into a little bit of the facts about Elmira's prisoner of war camp. Damn it, what the hell? Give me a second. This browser just freaking kicked me out of the site I was on. I went to the news. Okay, here we go. One day after the first 400 Confederates arrived from Maryland, 2 prisoners scaled the Elmira prison camp's 12-foot stockade wall and escaped. That's interesting. All right, number 3 here. When rats became a problem at the prison camp, a medium-sized black dog was used to catch them. Rat meat was sold to prisoners for 5 cents, but few could afford it. Eventually, 2 rebel soldiers from North Carolina were sent to a guardhouse for 30 days after they captured and cooked the dog. Dude,
Okay.
you're okay. Okay, this is normal selling rats to prisoners of war.
I didn't say it was normal.
And then they got like in trouble for eating the dog. I'd rather eat the dog than the rat.
Well, the reason they ate the dog wasn't because they were eating dog over rat. The reason they ate the dog was because they were doing it as a punishment. They wanted to sit up there and do it to thumb the guards. It was a sense of rebellion. That's what they did it for.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with rat meat. Just ask Best Korea.
Remember, this is in a Union war camp, okay? They have the money to feed these people. Just saying.
And they did get fed. These people were not. It's not. They come back and they say insufficient food, bouts of dysentery. Well, wait a minute here. All right, resulted in the deaths of 2,963 prisoners. Okay, they weren't starving to death. All right.
Did you see the name they named the camp? Why they were prisoners there? Helvira. That's an interesting name.
All prisoner war camps get names like that, dude. That's that's normal. All right.
But you're right. It was typhoid, dysentery. What else does it say?
Smallpox. You got a smallpox outbreak. All right. So, I mean, there's also another problem that we, when dealing with these things, actually didn't realize. All right, and that was, and we didn't even realize it until actually halfway through the World War II, and that was the dietary conditions of the people. All right, the South had a certain diet that was completely different than what the North was used to, and vice versa. And this was actually a problem. All right, is when you're used to a certain type of general food stuff, okay, and all of a sudden you're getting a different type of food stuff, it becomes your body doesn't react well to it initially, and it does lower your immune system. It decreases your immune system, which is one of the reasons why in these prisoner of war camps. All right, I mean, I'm surprised you pulled up Elmira, to be honest. There's a worse one that was actually happened in Chicago, in the Chicago area, in Illinois. All right. But it lowers your immune system, and people will actually die. Even if they're just mildly wounded, they don't recover correctly. And we didn't realize that the difference in the dietary requirements, all right, were so significant until World War II, when we were dealing with, around the world with everyone, all sorts of different people with different cultures, and what their foodstuffs were. And what kind of an effect it would have. So I think that also plays into this. But the biggest killer, of course, here was obviously disease. Now that was, you could say the same thing about
Andersonville,
Andersonville too. But there's a huge difference between 2,900 prisoners and 12,000.
Okay, but look at this. Number 6. An observation platform with chairs and binoculars was built outside the prison camp across Water Street west of Hoffman Street. Visitors were charged 10 cents apiece to look at the prisoners. Visitors were charged 10 cents apiece to look at the prisoners. Refreshments were sold to spectators while the Confederate soldiers starved. Dude,
I don't think they were not starving the way that you and I think of starvation.
What kind of refreshments? Were they over there drinking beer and shit? Like, oh, look at that Confederate soldier.
And how often did people sit up there and come out and gawk at the prisoners at Andersonville?
I wasn't able to find 20 things about Andersonville like I found for Elmira, so fair enough. I don't know, 40? Is that something you would do on a weekend, to take the kids out to view the prisoners?
Like, for crying out loud, remember the first Battle of Bull Run? Everybody came out to go watch the spectacle and were having a picnic. What else are you going to do? Life is boring. Back then, they didn't have TV even. They didn't have radio.
Why not take the kids to go see some Japs in the camp? You know, why not?
So is that why they sit on the porches in the ghettos? They want to watch the drive-bys.
This is interesting, and this might be the last fact I just read off here because this is getting kind of dry. But number 7, after the Civil War, a House committee that investigated the conditions of prisoners in Confederate camps declared that evidence proved Confederates were determined to kill Union prisoners. However, the Union's mistreatment of its prisoners of war was dismissed as rumor for more than a century.
Really? Now that's just an opinion piece. That's not a fact. That's straight opinion. That's straight opinion, and they're saying that this is a fact. They're saying that there's the House committee investigated conditions, all right, but then the thing was, however, Union mistreatment of prisoners of war was dismissed as rumor for more than a century. Right? Now, I'm not saying in the prison of war camp, no matter what it is, that you're treated with treated well. Okay, there things had to come a long ways. All right, back in the days, freaking prisoners were generally just shot. Okay, there weren't really. I mean, to be honest, the Civil War is really the first time you end up with a quote unquote really big prisoner of war camp. Okay,
and it wasn't like the Geneva Convention existed at the time, so treatment of prisoners wasn't really a thing.
No, it wasn't. Yeah. So this is part of a learning phase. Okay, and I'm not saying that anyone was treated better or worse or whatever from overall, but while the prisoners in the northern camps, all right, or in the southern camps, specifically Andersonville, all right, the conditions there were beyond what anything was over in Elmira. Was Elmira a wonderful place to be? Of course not.
Yeah, no, and I found one more interesting fact. 48 Confederate soldiers who died in the Great Shushola train wreck on July 15th, 1864, while en route to the Elmira prison camp, are buried at the Woodland National Cemetery. So there is that. I think that's pretty much all I'm going to read off about here. All right. So moving on from the prison camps, we also skipped over Fort Pillow. Go ahead. I'm sure you have lots to talk about when it comes to Fort Pillow.
Sounds like a very comfortable place.
It wasn't.
Well, the Fort Pillow massacre happened on April 12th of 1864. All right. Nathan Bedford Forrest was doing a raid, all right, through West Kentucky and Tennessee. All right. And the idea was, of course, is to try and force the hand of Sherman, to try and get him out of Atlanta, to relieve pressure on Atlanta. Now, this didn't work, okay? But this is what he was trying to do. Now, unfortunately, the fort, which is not a very military significant fort, it was initially put together actually by the Southerners, all right, early on, and quickly captured in 1862, I believe, by forces under Grant. They had stationed approximately 900 African American soldiers there. When Forrest arrived, he demanded the surrender of the fort. The Union refused. Forrest's forces were over 10 times what they had in the in the fort. The fort was quickly overwhelmed, and the black soldiers were basically systematically taken out and hunted down. If some of the previous soldiers were from Southerners who were in the military or as slaves to some of these people, they were re-enslaved, many of them. Other ones were just basically summarily shot. All right, because how dare black troops sit up there and rise against the white master? Now, there's a lot of people who blame Bedford Forrest for this, and I blame him, but not to the degree that a lot of people do. All right, Bedford Forrest lost control of his troops. Now, if there's no evidence that he necessarily ordered it to happen, but there was no reason for him to. Really, the raid was really kind of a silly raid to begin with on the fort. There was no reason to take the fort. He could have just bypassed it because it had no real military significance. In fact, after the raid, Bedford Forrest pulls back out because it leaves no troops there because there's no military significance to keeping the fort there. It was kind of useless. All right.
Did he put the fort to the torch?
No. Well, kind of, but not really. Right. I mean, they kind of stripped it, but they really didn't put it to the torch. Right. It's impossible to know, all the things that were happening because some of it is all hearsay. But Bedford Forrest did admit that that his troops had gotten out of his command and out of his control, and he didn't discipline them for the action. He basically said, "Okay, well, don't do that again," and whatever. During the battle, total casualties in the battle, all right, were 295 Union troops died, right? 14 Confederates were killed. So it shows you just how lopsided this whole thing was.
So
Yeah, no, and there is a lot of debate on Forrest's actions here. So you believe that the troops got away from him, that he didn't order the massacre?
I don't think he ordered the massacre because there was no point to doing it. I think that his troops got out of control because they were upset because black troops are now fighting against us, and they were trying to send a message, all right, to the other slaves: don't you dare rebel, or we'll kill you.
Well, don't you think the Union was also placing these troops in garrisons all around the South to thumb their nose at the South? No,
I think that they were just placing them in garrisons where they could. All right, they're conscripted. They're troops that are volunteering. All right, but they got to remember, troops were not allowed. Black troops were a fairly recent addition to the Union forces, so the quality of the black troops was always in question, even for the North, right? Just how good are they? Well, then what do you do with them? You have troops under command. Well, great. Then how about we use them in garrison duties where we know that they're generally behind the lines rather than trusting raw troops to the front lines. Now, later on, there are attempts at doing this. Obviously, they do move some Union troops up to black troops to the front, but for the most part, the black troops were being used as, okay, you go into garrison duty. It's a great place for garrison troops.
Well, it's greatest pillow fight.
Well, there were approximately 180,000 black troops that served in the Union Army, right, which was approximately 10% of the Union Army, right, for total by the end of the war. All right. Of those 180,000, 40,000 died. 30,000 by disease, right? I mean, this gives you an example of what life was like. But they had an extraordinarily high casualty rate. I mean, almost a third of the black troops died.
All right, so all right, the war dragged on for a long time. I don't think we necessarily, well, no, because that's more Reconstruction. So yeah, what else do you want to bring up here? This is the final episode. So anything that we might have skipped over that's interesting that you want to bring up and talk about?
I don't have anything more real specifically about it. We didn't really cover the Sheridan and the Shenandoah campaigns, and we didn't cover the Oklahoma Territory and what was really going on in any kind of depth. In the Oklahoma Territory, which was basically the Indian Territory, they called it the Indian Confederacy. For the most part, the Cherokee, there was two factions of Cherokee, right? There was a Cherokee that didn't want to move, but because their chiefs ordered them to move during the Trail of Tears, they left. Well, this led to a lot of bitterness toward several of the more powerful, at the time, more powerful tribes. The Trail of Tears, of course, was, you know, a horrifying experience. There was a number of, I think, of probably about a third of the Indians that attempted the Trail of Tears died on the trail, right? So there was a number of, literally thousands of Indians died, and for a lot of things, if anything could go wrong during the Trail of Tears, it went wrong. All right. I'm not going to make excuses about anything or even go deeply into it, but there were winter storms that would hit that came out of nowhere. There delays and all sorts of things that happened as a result. All right. But either way, the two factions were at odds with one another. The Civil War gave them the ones that were upset about the move entirely, right, a chance to say, okay, we're going to redress this. And they basically had a mini frickin' civil war of their own between the Cherokee tribes, where the ones that initially had been against the forced move more or less massacred the rest of them over the period of the Civil War. The Cherokee that you have left in the Oklahoma territories on those reservations are the Cherokee that basically joined the South and were in Southern commands.
Yeah, and there's also where was it? Was it there was another little mini fight, but this time it was it the Lakota, or it was one of the tribes that sided with the Union, and it was either in the Carolinas, I believe, or in Virginia.
Probably the Carolinas. I think the Carolinas. There were Indian tribes that sided with the Union in the Carolinas, mainly because in the Carolinas, specifically South Carolina, the Indians were treated worse than their slaves were. in fact, the slaves oftentimes would try to run, and the Indians would try to protect them and claim them as members of their tribes.
Interesting. I can't remember the name of it. Here, let me hit up Google real quick, because it's a really interesting story. It kind of turns into a feud in Reconstruction as well. They continue to fight.
Well, and that's one of the things that this is going to lead to is during Reconstruction, there was a lot of animosity still existed along for whatever lines. All right. There were brothers fighting against brothers, and so there were family feuds that were taking place. There were clan feuds that were taking place. And I don't mean clans as in the KKK. I mean clans as in, you're part of the McDonald clan or McDougal clan or whatever you want to look at it. There was those kind of things that were taking place, all right, to redress some of these issues, all right, and some family squabbling. It intensified, especially because after the end of the war, the South was, for all intents and purposes, its base economy was destroyed. All right. First of all, it was an agrarian society to begin with. Go ahead.
But having said that, though, like clans against clans, and you talk about like the Scottish and Irish and that kind of stuff. Been going on way before America is even founded. But just take the McDonald's and the Campbells, for example. Like can't remember where it was, but the Campbells sacked the McDonald town, and the fucking McDonald's went and sacked the Campbell town, and then everybody hated the fucking Campbells after Culloden Moor because they fucked off with the horses. And that's why the Highlanders lost to the British. But yeah, no, that kind of shit. Yeah, that didn't. I think the excuse of the war was just a bullshit excuse, right? You fucking fuck you. I remember 500 years ago, you bastard.
Well, I wouldn't put it past them to an extent, but I was just trying to give it so that people understand what I was referring to when I said clans. I wasn't trying to bring that up.
That shit to an extent does does still happen because I am related to the McDonald clan, and my last ex, her ex-husband was a fucking Campbell, and the ex-husband was all right with it, but the grandfather, as soon as he found out I was related to McDonald's, he's like, "Well, fuck you, laddie," and I'm like, "Well, I was going to leave this alone and let bygones be bygones, but now you have this attitude, you can get fucked too, cunts on."
Yeah, those things still continue. So I mean, they do exist, but
there's even pubs in Scotland, like there's Campbell pubs and McDonald pubs that either side can't go into, or else you get your head kicked in. Yeah,
yeah, that doesn't surprise me. It really doesn't surprise me. But there was a lot, and then of course with the people who had the money to rebuild were Northerners, right? And for the most part. The result was, of course, well, how can you do this? Well, the Northerners are money lenders. The Northerners are carpetbaggers. They're coming down and buying up their land, and they're changing our way of life and so forth. So that animosity, I mean, just made things even worse, right? I mean, there's a number of things that, I mean, you're trying to recover from the war. Obviously, the South is most devastating. Now, what was really bad about what happened in the South is in that kind of a condition, the South was right it was in a position where it could have industrialized very, very quickly. It could have said, you know what, we have nothing else. There's no reason to not start mechanization. There's no reason not to industrialize rapidly. But Reconstruction, the way Reconstruction happened and the results of it, though, prevented that from taking place, which is really a tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. The divide that happened because of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln lasted for a very long time in America, and it's still the root cause of a lot of tensions even today. So
people are carrying ridiculous animosities even to this day. The granddaughter or the great granddaughter of Nathan Bedford Forrest to this day, all right, talks about how she hates frickin' Lincoln. She never knew the man, knows nothing about the man, and yet she carries that hatred because of the hatred that her grandfather, or great grandfather rather, basically pushed upon her and forced upon her. So, those things, those kind of irrational kind of reactions anymore they're just nonsense.
yeah, sooner or later, the tensions will ease up, I think. But I don't know. You'll always have like the Sons of Confederate Veterans. You'll always have the Daughters of the Confederacy and these other groups that celebrate, the history of the war. But a lot of them have let go of a lot of this animosity, I think, anyway. But there is still other groups like the League of the South where they still preach secession to this day.
And they're going to secession was a lost cause then. It's a lost cause now. The secession could never work the way everyone keeps talking about it, the way it was envisioned. It can never work.
Maybe they should call it Brexit. It might work then. Oh, wait.
Yeah, right.
No, hey, serious question though. Apparently, there's Sheila still alive. I think she married a 90-something-year-old Civil War vet when she was like 12 or some fucking crap like that. She was alive a few years back, still receiving a war pension from the Civil War. She's still going.
I don't think there's anybody alive from the Civil War days.
Nah, she wasn't from the Civil War days. She was born after it, but she married some really old cunt. But she's apparently still getting, like, I think it's $5 a month or something like that from the government as a war pension.
I would have to see that. I haven't seen that story or heard that story before. But if she did, I mean, he had to be 90 when she married him at 12. Because I'll be honest with you, there are no more living veterans of World War I in the United States. I don't think.
They're all gone.
Veteran has died, so which is unfortunate as well because we're losing a lot of those stories as well.
Well, yeah, and like even because I've looked into joining the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and I have to prove my lineage, which I just need. They'll help you do it. I just need to get a couple more names from my dad to, to trace back, and that's all. But it's not even the sons of Confederate veterans anymore, though. It's now like the great grandsons. You know what I mean? You got to prove like,
yeah.
Yeah, it's at like what 3 or 4 generations I need to prove, and the longer I wait, the longer it's going to be.
Yeah, well, if you're interested in doing that and going back to your lineage to do that, feel free. I mean,
well, there's actually a Sons of Confederate Veterans camp out of Oregon, which is weird. But then again, a lot of the veterans moved to the West after the war, so it kind of makes sense, right?
Well, without anything being home and home no longer being there, what was the point of returning home? The life has changed. They've seen 2 things happen. One, many of these people who would have always stayed on the farm and never left the farm for the war. All right, and they saw things, all right, and that they had never seen before. Many of them were no longer going to be satisfied just returning back to the farm and back to the sedate lifestyle that they had before. So where could they pull up, restart again without any kind of opposition or anything? So they went west. All right, the memories of home are gone. You don't have to worry about any ties like that anymore. There's opportunities in the West. Of course, you end up. There's still the stories of the gold rushes that are happening, and how a man can make a living out there. So that's where many of them went. Of course, you also had people that they were still fighting with the Native Americans. There were still a number of tribes that had not settled down, and there was still constant warfare happening as a result. Right? I mean, you end up until the 1890s before the Indians are for lack of a better term, pacified and placed on into the reservation system. So many of them would join the military, right, and move out west as a career there, right. Many of the black soldiers actually went west, right. Fort Huachuca here in Arizona, for example, has a number of stories about the Buffalo Soldiers, which were black soldiers that served out here against the Comanche and the Apaches.
Okay, here we go. Nation's only Civil War pensioner collects $73 a month from the VA. This was of August 24th, 2017. The Civil War may have ended 152 years ago, but Irene Triplett still continues in a way far more tangible than recent flights over Confederate monuments. For Triplett 87, the Civil War means a monthly check for $73.13 from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Triplett is sole surviving. Oh, for fuck's sake, stop doing that. Keeps fucking tripping to another page. Triplett is the sole surviving person to be receiving a Civil War pension from the VA. It was not uncommon during the Great Depression for elderly Civil War veterans to marry much younger nurses and caregivers for financial reasons. Often those veterans adopted their new wives' children, making them eligible for survivors' benefits. That was not the case for Triplett. Triplett's father, Moses, or Moses documents vary as to his name. Triplett was born in North Carolina in 1846 and started the war as a Confederate soldier who deserted just before Gettysburg, according to a 2014 story about Triplett in the Wall Street Journal. He later fought for the Union. According to that report and others, Moses Triplett's first wife died sometime in the early 1920s. He married Elida Hall, Irene's mother, in 1924. Triplett was nearly 50 years older than his wife. Moses died in 1938. According to the journal, both the Triplett women had mental disabilities, unable to support themselves. The two moved into a poorhouse in Wilkes County, North Carolina in 1943. When that facility closed in 1960, the two moved to a private nursing home. Alida Triplett died in 1967. Irene Triplett lived in the same nursing home until 2013, when she moved to a nearby skilled nursing facility, the Journal reported.
So she was one of his children.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Well, she's, the last surviving Civil War veteran died in 1956 at 109, according to the VA. And the last Civil War widow died in 2008, age 93. But yeah, no, still some cunt collecting a fucking pension. Oh, unless she's died in the last year or so.
Well, $73 is not much of a pension, to be honest.
Well, it's still a pension.
You would think that would have been adjusted for inflation, but no.
It is the VA, mate.
How is somebody getting paid out if they deserted after Gettysburg? You don't pay out deserters.
He turned around and joined the Union.
Yeah. Pay attention, Dodge.
What did you say, Dodge?
No, that shouldn't be allowed. Like, that's some, like...
He joined the winning side. He said, you know what? The side with the white flag is... That side kind of sucks. Let me switch sides here.
Isn't that what happens in the North and South miniseries?
I don't remember.
It's been a while
since I saw that, but there were a number of soldiers who when their states were conquered, changed sides. This is understandable. All right, so I mean, at the same time, I mean, there were families that were split. There were many people that their one son would go fight for the Union and the other son would fight for the friggin', Confederacy. And I mean, these things did happen in the war. So it's unfortunate. I mean, it's part of the history that happened. But I mean, we look at it nowadays, and we can't conceive of that because we have no commonality with anything like that happening. All right, but that's the way it was. It was just what people decided to do, and some of those brothers remained brothers and didn't have a problem after the war, and other ones never forgave the other sibling. All right, and they would forgive them. Okay, I'll forgive this when I bury the hatchet in your head. So.
One thing we should also clarify for everybody, since this is, the final episode. I don't remember what year it was, but the United States military considers all Confederate veterans a part of the United States military. So this idea that you should tear down the monuments is ridiculous unless you want to go tear down the Vietnam Wall. But
they don't give these asshats any more suggestions. They're already trying to tear up frickin' the Jefferson Monument and so forth. These people are insane lunatics.
Yeah, and it's also still a dangerous sentiment too because of the unpopularity of the Vietnam War at the time. I mean, I'm pretty sure they fought to have that fucking memorial put up because there's so much fucking people didn't want it.
There's a lot of people that were the Vietnam War. There's a lot of dynamics in there that most people don't get. All right. For the most part, many of the younger people that served in the Vietnam War were proud of their service and think that we did the wrong thing in pulling out the way we did. Right. There's many others that hate the hippies. All right. Everyone talks about it as if somehow the hippies are so glorified and universally loved. They're not. There are many people that are very bitter toward them, even to this day. And I can't say as I blame them.
But there's many people who were drafted that once they got back out, they deserted or they joined the hippie movement or they never went anyway when they were drafted and they ran to Canada.
Once again, the people that did that, while there were people that did that, they were an extraordinarily small number. They were never a significant number. But of course, they were of course the focal point of this, so stories are written about them and so forth.
Yeah,
They
well,
were
a lot of people
It
don't.
was never as much as people think it was. People think, oh yeah, there was all these. Most of those guys never forgave the draft dodgers. Most of those people were one of the reasons why I think that the beatdown of Carter during the election against Reagan. One of the reasons, now obviously the economy is bad and everything else, but that landslide, I think Carter won what 10 states, and I'm adding Washington D.C. He got obliterated. Okay. And I think a large part of that also came down to the fact that he stood up there and said and allowed the Vietnam fleers that fled to Canada back in the country.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand and realize too that we actually copped the exact same shit out here. We had the hippie movement. We had when the first lot of troops were coming home, they had fucking people shouting "baby killer" and fucking running out, painted in red paint just to fucking go and give the soldiers a hug so they'd be covered in what looked like blood. Fucking, and even the government didn't recognise or didn't acknowledge the Vietnam War up until 1984 or 5 or something like that, when they finally had a coming home parade for the veterans and all this kind of stuff. They've been fighting for fucking decades just to get fucking, you know, proper fucking shit out of the Department of Veterans Affairs and all this kind of shit. Yeah, we had the whole thing. We had stevedores at the ports refusing to load the ships with even just food supplies for the troops over in Vietnam. We had mass protests and all this kind of stuff. We had we had conscription at the time, and the Vietnam War was actually the reason why we got rid of conscription, because all these fucking hippie cunts had a referendum, and that's also where we lowered the voting age and the drinking age from 21 to 18. And because the argument was that you could be conscripted at 18, but you're not allowed to vote. So how can you be sent off to a far off country to die when you can't even have a say in the country? And that also brought in the welfare state and Gough Whitlam, and that's pretty much where our country went shit. But yeah, no, we had the same fucking crap. Yeah, out here.
The other thing is, and I've pointed this out to several people, and they don't understand this. The people protesting the war, right? And we're not. The thing is that many people confuse the civil rights marches with the anti-Vietnam War marches because of the time frame that was, you know, generally fairly close, right? They kind of overlap to a degree, right? And that's where you get all this, you know, nostalgia from, right? The thing was, though, is the people that were protesting were the rich kids. They were the ones that were in college. They were the ones that could afford college, right? The ones going to the war were the ones who were patriotic, and they were also the ones that, you know, they couldn't get any kind of deferment because they weren't going to college.
Right? You weren't no senator's son.
You know, well,
no fortunate boy.
Even when there was senator's sons, where did they go? Did they served in Saigon the entire time?
All the Champagne Squadron and, you know, Vietnam.
Based in Germany.
I don't know.
No, you use that term "Champagne Squadron," and you pulled that out for the way you talk about us, not the way we talk about our own people.
No, it was a particular group that was nicknamed that by the Americans. It wasn't something we labelled it.
I think it was not. It
was nicknamed that by the Americans because it was the people,
who?
all the kids
Which
who didn't.
American?
Well, it was Bush. There was Bush.
No.
Okay, I don't know who gave the title to it.
Right,
it was an American title. I'm saying it wasn't given by.
I'm saying that it was that title was probably given by some New York freaking twit long after the freaking.
Well, yeah, I mean it's going to be something for a headline, right? But they're the ones who titled it.
I thought Bush Jr. was in the cocaine squadron.
Yeah, that was a different one. That was Nicaragua.
Nobody served in Nicaragua. We never went into Nicaragua.
No, not officially, but you know, it was it was those days.
They just sent Beavis.
We never sent troops to Nicaragua. That was
joking. For fuck's sake, MC.
Well,
they didn't have to send troops to Nicaragua. They just sent Beavis.
For the sake of when I go back and edit all these, we're gonna go ahead and go off air if we're gonna diverge away from the Civil War. But Okay, so we're gonna take a couple week break, right? And then we're coming back with some World War One. And we're gonna get some of our British friends involved.
Yeah.
Just the British, you bastard.
No, you need the Aussies, you need the New Zealanders, you've got to get now you got Canadians. You've got to include the whole
Does
empire.
anybody know a French person we can have for the French representative?
Why would you want them anyway?
That'd just
What do
be
you mean?
boring.
The first 10 minutes is you can ask them how they fucked it up that time as well, and then that's the end of their fucking contribution.
You know, the French would be boring because all of their stories would just end with, and then we ran away.
Then we ran out of white flags.
You can say that, but their fight at Verdun was not. They didn't run away.
No, they ran with machine guns.
Their ration packs include a fucking white flag.
we searched and searched for many hours. Then we found the white flag, and then we ran away.
But hey, I see Doku in the chat. We're gonna go off there, but I think we're gonna kick it for a few more minutes. Cabby just jumped in, so I don't want to be like, "All right, Cabby, bye." So go ahead and jump in and hang out. Links in my. But I am going to.
An hour. I thought you had more to say. It's only been an hour.
Oh, we usually do an hour for the Civil War streams, and I'm going to be going back and editing all of them, so it's going to be a bitch. Thank you everybody for watching. We might figure out something to do next Sunday while we wait and gather some information for the World War I stuff, because I don't know that much about World War I, to be honest. I'm gonna have to brush up on it.
Well, you'll never understand World War II until you understand World War I.
Yeah, that's
you really can't, and you can't understand the dynamics that are going in play. Well, for the entire world, all right. I mean, for the British, obviously, the main focus throughout the entire war was pretty much on the Atlantic side and dealing with the freaking Nazis. All right. Yes, there
weren't Nazis back then. They were this Kaiser.
Well, right. No, I'm talking about World War II at this point. All right. So if you're going to understand it, all right, you have to go back to that, and you also have to go back to that to understand Japan. All right. Because Japan actually fought in World War I. Many people don't realize this.
Yeah.
Right?
They grabbed a lot of land. I mean, Manchuria and things like that.
Well, they were actually very upset with the conference. They were upset with what they were proportioned to do, and it leads basically to them leaving the League of Nations. Okay. To a large extent, and of course, the League of Nations was basically the first attempt, the first proto attempt at the UN. All right. It was far more worthless.
First attempt at the global union.
So, what was that?
Oh, I said that's hard to do, to be more worthless than the UN. I mean, unless you're the EU.
Oh, no. The League of Nations, that was basically just fucking, yeah, we'll just say shit but never act on it. And the UN at least will say, yes, we'll stick our nose in and then do nothing, but fucking these cunts didn't do nothing to begin with.
And World War One, the end of it was just carving up. It was basically like, that scene in, The Godfather, just carving up the cake, just drawing lines over maps and things.
But once again, thank you everybody. For the sake of editing, I'm gonna go ahead and end it right now. We're out of here. It's been a fun series. Hopefully, when I clean it up a little bit and edit it all together, it'll look a lot nicer too.
Good night, everybody. You're going to edit it out. Usually, he's going to make it out. He's going to edit it so that the South won.
Yeah. I think on that note, that's where we should end it later. We're out of here.